two deputations in relation to that request. Two requests for deputations in relation to that one item on our agenda today, and I would like to invite Helen Broughton to the table.
Madam Chair, that Jeff Friend will speak first, but we can both come up if you like.
Well, we can both come up together, yeah. So we've also got Jeff Friend from the Kilmarnock Deans Bush Residents Association.
So, you go first, Jeff.
And members of the council, my name is Jeff Friend. I'm chairman of the Riccarton Bush Kilmarnock Residents Association, and I have studied the agenda overnight. It was fairly substantial, and I don't pretend to be fully conversant with it, but there are just a couple of aspects that has raised some concern within our association. We're particularly concerned that the council staff has recommended scenario 2 as the preferred option. I think that's on page 21. In our view, the living one zones do not want to be swamped with high density development. And in our view, there are no problems with the existing rules. As I've said, we're concerned that the staff recommends scenario 2 as the preferred option. Appendix 3 to this paper points out that regarding the disadvantages of scenario 2, that residents within this area, that's the living one zone, will have a range of views in regard to intensification, and more importantly, that consultation with residents in potential areas of intensification is necessary before any informed decision can be made. And I just remind the council of that particular aspect, that it is important that there is consultation. And in my view, this should have happened before today's meeting, but the first we heard of it was picking up from Helen Broughton advising me last night that this matter was to be discussed today. And I spoke to the secretary of our association and she knew nothing about it. And I just felt that in the circumstances there should have been more publicity given so that other affected residents may wish to make their comment. So, Your Worship, that's all I have to say on this matter, and I defer to Mrs. Broughton.
Okay, thank you. Madam Mayor, do you want me to start? Yes, thank you. Good morning, everybody. I didn't expect to be addressing a council meeting as a resident so soon in the new council, because I hoped you could get on with your business the way that you wished to. But I wasn't aware of this issue until I opened my computer at 3 o'clock yesterday. And many affected residents throughout the city will not even be aware that this change is in fact proposed. So the process is not good. If a major change is to be made to living one zones, I believe that you need to notify the meeting clearly in the paper and the content of that meeting. If there is a proposal to radically alter a neighbourhood, which I believe you do have in 6.3, and it will affect our area in particular, so I will talk then about our area, we should have been informed about it to make comment. Even with our area, if we'd had more time, the whole gallery here would have been full, and that's just our area alone. So it's very serious what the proposal is in 6.3 in terms of changing the living one requirements. And I am focusing on living on 6.3. There are a number of other options which you've got. I haven't looked carefully at them. I don't have any particular issue with them. So I think they're probably good and fair and will give you more housing. So I'm going to speak on two sort of hats. One, I'm going to talk briefly as an elected member for Riccarton Wigram, and secondly, I'll talk as a resident. As an elected member as a councillor last term, I attended all the planning meetings relating to residential zoning. I wasn't a member of that committee, but I attended those sections where we were looking at residential zoning. And I felt what came out of that was reasonable. Intensification or density would occur in living 2 and 3, but if there was a need to add on from a living 1 zone, then you would do that. And that seems reasonable. But living 1 was actually excluded as a whole. And I continually asked this question. Senior planning staff, Brigitte Durand, I mentioned her, kept saying to me, living 1 would be not tampered with. And that cut right across the planning staff and senior planning staff. Now, the reason to protect living 1 is that it's a low density environment. People have bought into that area on that understanding. It normally has established houses and trees, contributes strongly to our garden city image. So whatever you do, it's intended to be an intense and dense environment. And I'll talk now as a resident, because I'm actually affected by this. The area I live in is 25 Rata Street. It's a living 1 zone, and it's got Riccarton Road on one side and a buffer. Then it's got the living 1. It's got Rata, Kauri, Remu and Tatoki. And across Straven Road there's Bradshaw Terrace as well. And I think we go broader than that, but just in my local area. It's become, and we have Riccarton House and Bush on the other side. You've got Riccarton Road, this precinct, and then Riccarton House and Bush with lots of trees. It's a precinct area now, and council spent, I think, over 100,000 on reconstruction and planting about 5 years ago, for which we were very, very grateful. But it actually enhanced the aesthetic value of the street. And we have got a lot of development anyway. It's a mixture of character homes, units, both older and recent new ones. It's got recently built standalone homes on some of the sections that have become available. And recently in Remu Street, a section was divided and a back house was built on. And all that has been no problem. It has created or added to, or at least not harmed, the ambience of the area. I've lived there for over 30 years. My second child was born. So the strong links there, and a lot of people have lived there for such a long time as well. So it's a defined community which has got social connections, and it's got the sort of ambience which looks exceedingly good. We always have been concerned about encroachment from the commercial sector, and the residents group, when it was formed about 1987, I'm not a member of it because I've had to stand aside as an elected member, but it's the Kilmarnock Deans Bush Residents Association, was formed about 87, formed to protect the encroachment of the commercial sector into the residential sector. So the area has always been of concern, but we saw Riccarton Road shops expanding, or parking expanding, but we never expected to happen. And we would have seen an erosion of our living standards only coming through a formal review of the district plan. We wouldn't have seen it coming in this way. It's almost a backdoor way of doing it. Can I just now, I did give someone could you just flick through the housing there so people get a picture of it? So that's a divided section. Not sure what that's about. That's the old one of the character homes, but alongside the new unit. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks. That's a section next to me, so I'll come back to that. A vacant section. There's some new housing. Click on one of the character homes. new housing of three units, which have been able to be built under Living One. We've got a view down two new units. Sorry? Living One, yep. And as far as I know, it in fact was no resource consent. So it was just allowed. No, those two are just modern units. Anything? I'm not sure why that was done. But that's just, now that's the view down the street. Right? Anything else? Again, a new unit there. New units. And that's the view again. Thank you. So those were taken by my husband this morning, so that's just a snapshot of what it's like. A lot of developments occurred there already. It hasn't caused any problems, and if people wanted to get a few more housing on it, they could always apply for a resource consent. I've got a vacant section. Now, the worry we have is the vacant section right next door to me was an old student flat, bowled because of the earthquake. I know the owner of it's waiting to see how things go. I mean, that's just waiting a year. And you could potentially build 3 units there or maybe 4. But what could happen if you go ahead with what is on the staff recommendation, you could potentially build 10 units there, take another section alongside, and then you'd get a massive complex. And there's been a massive student complex built on the corner of Rattray Street and Riccarton Road. That holds 24 units, and it's 3-storey high, and it's a concrete block. So the worry at an extreme end is that you get concrete block apartments, and you might have student accommodation. And for those of you, you've probably seen Lyle and Riccarton with having issues between the residents and the students. Largely sorted. It's not a huge issue, but that could be an effect if you do not stay with scenario 1.
Helen, we're going to run out of time for you. I just want you to explain what the difference between scenario 1 and scenario 2 is for where you live.
Well, if it's scenario, this is my interpretation. I've had a talk with a planner, so this is my.
It's just that the pictures look identical for the Riccarton area.
Yes, it is. Well, this is a Living One zone, and a lot of development's been able to occur in that, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, but I'm just saying
if you go to scenario 2, you would allow that any development as of right.
No. Scenario 1 and 2 are identical for the Riccarton area because we're not allowing significant intensification in the Riccarton area because of pressure on the sewage system.
Well, that isn't my interpretation from the planner.
Just look at the 2 pictures on the map, the 2 maps, scenario 1 and scenario 2. Go to the maps and look at the Riccarton section and just explain to me how they're different.
Well, I think in Riccarton 1 is slightly bigger, but I let the one go. It's more the wording there.
The blue bits are just the existing Living 3. It's the little green box that is the addition to the enhanced, the comprehensive mechanism. That's a development mechanism, and that is exactly the same size in scenario 2.
Except that if you look at Appendix 3, so it's really the wording. So my understanding of it is that if you take scenario 1, which is what the council signed off in August, September last term, you have Living 2 and Living 3 with a slight extension into Living 1 on occasions when it's needed. But Scenario 2 is that the Living One mechanism you have as a... So it's not, it's Living 2, Living 3 and Living 1.
It's just the green bits on the, it's only the green bits on the plan, and I'm just saying that in terms of Riccarton, there is no difference between scenario 1 and scenario 2.
I'm not sure though, that you might need to talk to the, my understanding talking to the planner is that the land, it could go into a Living One area. It's not just what's on the map.
No, it's just what's on the map.
You sure?
Yeah.
Well, that's what she's saying, Helen.
Yes.
Yeah.
Would you follow that through with
Yeah,
the
no, we will.
planner?
So
Yeah.
when we get on to the actual discussion, but your significant concern is based around the Riccarton area, and I think you've presented that case very well.
Well, I'm also probably concerned that the Fenelton Mall areas are going to have this. That was what one of the planners said yesterday. So it's any area that's, any Living One area which is close to a supermarket complex or shopping complex is potentially at risk. And I don't think the plan is a watertight plan. That was the issue I got when I spoke to the planner yesterday.
Okay.
It's a more, yes. So I guess I'll just conclude. Please protect the Living One areas. Do not allow intrusion into them at this point. Take a precautionary approach. You might approve the other aspects of this of the changes today, the 6.2.1, the 6.2.2, 6.2.3, 6.2.4. But please go with scenario 1 rather than scenario 2. Please protect the people who are in the Living One environment, who have chosen to live in a less dense area. And please don't do this with a stroke of a pen today. At the very least, if you think it might be a good idea, perhaps sign off on the others today, and then let's have more consultation on that other issue of the Living One, if you think you need to go there. And you might go there in 18 months' time if you have to. But it's really an unknown, and the potential to change neighbourhoods in the Living One area is in fact huge. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you both. Much appreciated.
Yep.
Thank you.
So that brings us on to... oh, sorry. Yeah. Okay, well, sorry. Helen, could you answer a question from Councillor Clearwater? Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. As a new councillor, I've looked at the recovery strategy for Greater Christchurch and some of the ideals that are in there, and I just wondered if what might perhaps assist your Fendalton community in Riccarton is if, for example, a housing development is part of the council's approach. If say it had to be either agreed to by a local community representative or a community board, would that assist your concern? Or
Yes.
would assist addressing your concern?
I think it would, but I think it's hard to actually do. Because I think a developer has views, he's got his cost structures. I think to put it through a community board would probably not be quite the right thing from that perspective. I think you're probably better to leave Living One alone at this point. If you still don't have housing in a year's time, we'll go back to it then.
Thanks, Helen.
And other changes that are going to help.
Sorry, I'll allow one more question. Councillor Chen.
Helen, may I ask you one question?
Yeah, sure.
Because as you are aware, if from the change the scenario 1 to scenario 2, but still need to through the council operative, the city plan the review. That's a consultation, whether you're satisfied or not, or you prefer another consultation.
No, well, look, probably if I was talking as a resident, I would say, please do not go with scenario 2, but you can look at this area through the district plan. Yes. And at that point, there'll be consultation. Yes. Yeah.
So you're satisfied?
I'm happy. If you're doing it through the district plan, fine. It gives people an opportunity to come in and discuss. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right, we'll now move on to the item concerned. And we have a report in front of us, and I would like to, well, I want to amend the report, so amend the recommendations. So I just wonder, should we have a separate mover and seconder, or can I move the amendments before I just move the amendments? Yep. So item 3.1 to amend endorses the intensification provisions of the land use recovery plan, so that it doesn't read endorses the land use recovery plan, but endorses the intensification provisions of the land use recovery plan. I've been waiting for some wording on the legal aspects for number 2. Have we got any further on there? So I want to indicate that there are some elements of clause 2 that need us to revoke the decisions of the previous council, which, as I understand, was taken in public excluded. So this is the first time this has been debated in the public arena. In the previous council, it was debated behind closed doors. And that is unfortunate, I think, for a lot of people not understanding the history of the council's involvement in the development of the land use recovery plan, which is now in the government's hand for the government to implement. So we will need some a wording change to number 2 as well. And then on number 3, if we change the word comprehensive development mechanism to the word enhanced development mechanism, as that will be the language that will be adopted when the government gives effect to the land use recovery plan. So I will come back with a further amendment, and I think the Deputy Mayor will second those amendments, and if we could open that up for debate. Who would like to start? Or perhaps we've got Mike Teelan at the end of the table, and I think that perhaps we could start with questions, because obviously this is a significant issue, and I think that a number of questions have already been indicated. So Councillor Johansson can start.
Thank you. Question for Michael. If I was a resident or a citizen of the city and I looked at the draft land use recovery plan, would I have any idea that we would be about to make changes as part of finalising that program? Or would I expect that there would have been a further process to communicate, engage, collaborate with local communities over what sort of intensification would occur?
I suppose the draft land use recovery plan did signal that there would be that intensification was one of the tools that was identified in that plan as meeting some of the housing needs. I suppose the process that was adopted and recommended by council initially was twofold. One was to look at intensification as part of the district plan review, and that would look at intensification globally across the city, and that was reflected in terms of the previous position that the council and the other councils of Canterbury took with the urban development strategy. So to that extent, the concepts of intensification were arguably well known. The council also committed to looking at the introduction of a comprehensive development mechanism. It was referred to as a floating zone at the time, and there was a clear direction in the draft LERP that was to be that would be activated at the time of the Minister making the recovery plan operative. So in that sense, the issue around intensification was understood. However, it's probably reflective that the intention that was signalled by the council was primarily to look at that intensification mechanism in terms of further modifications to look at how it could further enhance development of the living 2 and 3 zones, and some, I suppose, what were termed modest sort of amendments to those. So some tweaks to those where they're made with some logical sense to do so. So the community may not have anticipated that out of the land use recovery plan there would be direct changes to large parts or parts of the living 1 zone. So it's really a matter of degree in some respects about what the changes people may have anticipated versus what may come out of the land use recovery plan by the Minister.
Just so I'm clear, the land use recovery plan talked about a further process to work through what changes for intensification would be made to regulatory documents. What we're now being asked to do is make the changes without those further processes happening, and the public have had known about it since 3 o'clock yesterday. Is that correct?
No, yes and no. It signalled a number of tranches. So it signalled a tranche around the review of the city plan, and that would have addressed intensification as part of that, and will continue to do so. It signalled that there would be a floating zone, or what's now called the enhanced development mechanism, would be looked at and would be introduced through the plan. What was not known at the time, because the work hadn't been done, was the extent to which that would apply to different parts of the city.
And just the second question is, when we look at the photos that were presented, we saw a number of intensification developments in the living 1 zone under the current district plan. Can you just advise how much current capacity do we have under existing zoning in our city to accommodate more housing, and how is this going to be any different to what currently exists to enable people to intensify?
Okay. In terms of that, if you look at page section 4.3 of the report, that figure's there now in the revised version. So there is, if I go back to the question, so there is capacity in the current living 1, 2 and 3 zone to allow further intensification. That exists now, and that exists either through the nature of development, i.e. you've got large sections which could be further subdivided, and or the possibility always remains for people to apply for resource consents to make that intensification happen. So what we have, though, is a relatively stable market, and most cities in New Zealand and elsewhere will have effectively a greater notional capacity for development than they actually have ever taken up, because people make choices about they don't want to develop all their properties in this particular way, they don't want to intensify, they like to have a large backyard, or they want to have a tennis court or something of that nature. So there's always a notional supply of land, and there's what the market ultimately delivers. And prior to the earthquakes, there was a regular subdivision of some of those larger sections, but it never was a great number, and it never significantly added to the volume of housing. What I suppose this mechanism is designed to do is to say, actually, it does two things. One is it actually talks to the market and says, actually, what we will do is not only allow for that development to happen, but in certain instances we will allow for a further intensification of that, so a greater incentive to the market to develop, but also talks about developing or making opportunity for a different form of development, so a more intense form of development. Because while traditionally in the living 1 and 2 zones, or in the living 1 zone in particular, you could re-subdivide, you were largely confined to producing standalone houses again, and a lot of the photos that were shown are that. So this mechanism effectively potentially opens the market for new development. It opens the market for a comprehensive form of development, i.e. it looks at amalgamating sites and actually generating a higher yield. And I suppose in some respects that speaks to a reflection of some of the problems that we've had, and I use the word problem advisedly, a form of development that's been symptomatic in the country and in Christchurch for many, many years, and that is that our form of intensification has largely been driven by carving off the back of sections, and that's actually not a very effective form of intensification as an urban planning tool. So in some respects, what this tool does, it actually allows a more comprehensive version of intensification to be offered to the market.